Hello everyone and welcome to this ANROWS webinar on the prevention of violence against women and safer pathways to services for culturally and linguistically diverse communities. My name is Maria Collis and I'm the project lead at ANROWS for our culturally and linguistically diverse Projects with Action Research initiative. Before we begin this webinar today, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling through to you from the lands of the Darug people. I'd also like to acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, from all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands you're joining us from today, and to recognise that their sovereignty was never ceded. I'd also like to recognise at this time the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on communities across the country. We know that it's having an impact on people's access to family violence services, and we also know that it's disproportionately impacting those on temporary visas and those with a precarious visa status. Our thoughts are very much with those affected. It's particularly at a time like this that we really value this opportunity to come together with you and share some of the work that we've been doing. So let me tell you a little bit about the initiative. So the ANROWS CALD PAR initiative is funded by the Australian Government Department of Social Services. It involves 26 projects from across the country working on family violence with CALD communities. 18 of those projects focused on prevention, and 8 of those projects focused on creating safer pathways to crisis and support services. ANROWS was contracted to support these projects to take an action research approach to evaluating their activities. From all the project's action research, as well as our own support notes and evaluation surveys, we've published an Insights for Practice report. This report contains 10 key insights for practitioners and policymakers. Although we've dealt with limited data and it's not representative of all the work in this area, it does present some important directions for intersectional, collaborative, and critically reflexive work with CALD communities. In today's webinar, we'll be focusing on 3 main areas of insights. These are strengths-based community engagement, working with CALD men as allies in prevention, and capacity building in cultural safety. I'll be joined today by 3 wonderful project leaders from the CALD PAR initiative, and we'll also have videos from 3 project teams during the webinar. So let me introduce you to our panel of 3 project leaders from the CALD PAR initiative. Firstly, we have Seblewerk Tardasa, the Director of SAP's Community Hub in Queensland. Seble, can you tell us a little bit about the work that your project has been doing in prevention in the CALD PAR initiative?
Thank you, Maria. Our project was being funded by Department of Social Service to prevent domestic violence for 6 African community groups. But we managed to deliver our project beyond those focusing groups. And with the help of community leaders gathering and Multicultural Australia, we managed to deliver the project to Middle East and Southeast Asian community group, and including other African community group. Through our project, we have been raising community awareness using community conversation as a tool, and community conversation guide as communities to use. And our other focus was to facilitate a peer support group for men using their interest and hobby. And after we just also using their interest and to develop community and service educational resource by partnering with other agencies. We also deliver forums annually with a partner organization to the community group after we collect our community conversation. Through our community conversation, we collect data and issues, and also understanding of communities' attitude in domestic family violence. And we use those community conversation resource to address further findings and gaps in the community and the service.
Thank you so much, Seble. And we'll be hearing more about your work around Men's Shed and the Men Managing Change program as well during the webinar. We're now going to move to Catherine Adey, the Prevention of Violence Against Women team leader at Multicultural Centre for Women's Health in Victoria. Catherine, hi. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing?
Hi, Maria. So Making the Link, it's part of the Safer Pathways stream of the CALD PAR initiative, and it's a collaborative project working with migrant women living in regional Victoria to link them to mainstream family violence and other relevant services in regional areas. And those areas are Ballarat, Bendigo, Mildura, Swan Hill, and Geelong. And we achieve this by building capacity on both sides. So that means delivering education sessions in English and in language to encourage migrant women and men to reflect on their well-being in relation to gender equality, and also to discuss and reflect on gender and race-based discrimination and family violence, and to provide support and information on where to seek help locally. At the same time, we support a range of services from response to prevention of violence to understand and address barriers that are experienced by migrant women in regional areas. So I'll get into more later, but for example, this could include visa uncertainty, which Maria already talked about, a fear of being stigmatized by people in the community and also by mainstream services about people's cultural background. And all of this is obviously compounded by remoteness and social isolation in regional areas.
Thank you, Catherine. And now we'll go to Dipti Zachariah, the Multicultural Health Team Leader at Western Sydney Local Health District. Dipti, can you tell us a little bit about your project?
Thanks, Maria. Our project was titled Rich Culture Should Have Rich Relationships, and it was a partnership model between Multicultural Health Services at the local health district and the Punjabi community's Harman Foundation and two community partners from the Sudanese community's Nuba Mountain Group and the Spiritual Reevaluation Group. So the major aim of the project was for the communities to develop a conceptual understanding and recognition of domestic violence within the context of culture, gender, generational differences, and social changes, build the community's capacity in planning development of appropriate community-driven DV awareness and prevention initiatives, and develop culturally appropriate resources in partnership with the communities at a grassroots level. The project started early in February 2018, and we're still going through it. And it enabled us to actually not only develop conceptual understanding of the communities, but help them design and own the interventions to make it much more sustainable once this project closes. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Dipti. And we'll be hearing more from all of our presenters throughout the webinar today. So now we'll move to our first set of insights for the webinar. Some of our most important findings in this initiative were around strengths-based community engagement. The insights for practice that we've drawn out in this area in our report are to invest time in building culturally safe and trusting relationships with diverse groups and leaders in communities, and also to support CALD communities through strengths-based and aspirational language around gender equality and violence prevention. Now we'll see a little bit about how this works in practice. We have a video contribution from the team at Relationships Australia, South Australia, on their Good Life project. A reminder to submit your questions as the video plays.
Our DV prevention program started 2 years ago, funded by the Commonwealth. After receiving funding from the government, we immediately established a panel, selection panel, which had a representation from the community as well as management here at Relationships Australia. And 2 part-time workers were employed, a total of only 3 days, but we had to capitalize on the knowledge of other African workers within Relationships Australia and outside Relationships Australia. And with their help, we established an advisory committee with 80% of its members were of African background. And between all the networks, the workers and the advisory committee, we built lots and lots of networks and connections with different communities, African communities, who helped us access the community and started facilitating conversation at management level as well as at the community and different networks that included churches, mosques, wherever we could get in, we basically went in.
if we were to have gone into the community and talk about, oh, we have a session on family and domestic violence, the level of engagement would have received would have been different, because we know this from experience in working with other taboo topics, that putting a negative spin or naming it directly when people are not ready becomes a barrier. But the strategy with this project is to look from a point of view of what people really connect with, and in terms of engaging and consulting with the community to come up with their understanding of the issue and how they wish to engage with it, and they came up with the name Good Life. Good life in the sense that everyone recognized that for them to leave their countries to come to Australia, they had the intention of coming to have a good life. But then the issue becomes, when they come in Australia, so many things come up, maybe unemployment, lack of understanding of the system, issues with relationship, parenting, and so many other things then come in the way, and then conflict arises. And if people don't know how to manage these things or how to seek for help, it then sort of escalates into family and domestic violence.
When we go into a community, we know, like that community A or B, this is the issue, this is the understanding, and these are the barriers.
I didn't know much about domestic violence, especially from the African young people's point of view. This project provided me that opportunity to engage with young people like myself. I feel really confident I can talk about the domestic violence in a way that it does not really stigmatize it.
I mean, this program is much needed. I mean, there's an element of taboo that's attached to it. It has opened a new platform where people can come and start to have these really important but quite sensitive discussions. And we've seen some breakthroughs, because once you start to articulate your feelings really better, and your problem-solving skills just automatically improves. But my biggest fear is initiatives like this that are unique and quite empowering, if there's no kind of an element of sustainability in it, that like becomes intergenerational, we kind of lose the whole kind of long-term impact aspect of it.
As a woman, I know that I'll have daughters, I have nieces, I have sisters, I have friends, and having these conversations not only destigmatizes DV as a topic, it also makes it easier for us to talk about it as women when we come together. And also when I see myself having conversations, I've personally gone through or seen or experienced domestic violence in the flesh, so I understand that when it's not talked about or it is a taboo topic, I understand how that can be damaging to families and the youth as well.
One good thing about the program actually was the fact that we are not told what to do or how to say things. We are given that opportunity to express ourselves, what we think about domestic violence. And this is something that sometimes gets missed in the whole picture, because sometimes men from African background, we feel like people have this feeling that we are the perpetrators all the time, and so there's this negative connotation to it. So when you say domestic violence, people don't want to talk about it.
The project has achieved so much, and I wish I had more time to go through them all. In a very nutshell, I could say that all the promotional materials that we've developed are still being used. The poster is being used actually as a tool to help the conversation, whether we're working with individual or family or a community. We've held so many conversation sessions with the community, and we've learned so much, and we've developed basically a lot of information about understanding about the cultural context. We've run cross-cultural training also to help service providers understand the context of DV within African community. We have built a huge network. We have confidently, we could say, more than 2,000 people benefited from the program with so little funding. There is a huge movement from the youth community, African, to keep the conversation happening. And we've developed also videos to help our community also continue the conversation.
So thank you, Raza, for that video example of taking a whole-of-community approach to prevention, using aspirational language around achieving the good life for families, and gradually allowing family violence to be discussed in the context of settlement. Dipti, I know that your project took a related approach with two different communities. How long did it take you to build trust with those communities?
See, initially when we started, both communities were happy to come on board, but it took us almost, I would say, 6 to 8 months to slowly start building trust and allowing communities to actually get us into their space. So that was the initial trust building, and it easily took us a year for them to, I would say, completely trust us and disclose or even come on board as a partner where they felt respected and valued in the engagement.
Right, and how important was responding to their different settlement journeys when building that trust?
As I mentioned when I started, we had two different communities, the Punjabi community on one end of the spectrum, and on the other side you had the South Sudanese community with a refugee background. They were at different levels of engagement with different challenges. And as the practitioners and people on the project team, it was important for us not to stereotype and label, but appreciate that their challenges are different and where they are at that moment is important. So we had to understand whether it was, there was post-traumatic stress involved, where there were other cultural issues that one community had more than the other, whether their styles of parenting was different, the patriarchal lenses through which they saw life was different, and understand that with them alongside, and then approach the issue. So they had different challenges. For example, with the Punjabi community, right from the beginning, they spoke a lot about challenges around gender equality. And for the Sudanese community, it manifested through intergenerational conflict. So this started from the beginning, and we had to approach it using what they saw as the issue, and then slowly bringing in other challenges that might come through. And with a lot of these communities, for example, the Punjabi communities, you had settlement issues because you had women who came on dependent visas. They came with their partners or husband. With the Sudanese community, you had settlement, even though you had defined settlement time, say for 5 years. In 5 years, refugee communities should be settled and functioning and ready to conquer the world. Many of them fell through the gap. So we had to address those issues and connect them to services that would support them to ensure they're fine and in a safe place to go ahead with the focus on domestic violence and family violence prevention.
And how is this approach that you took different to community consultation as it's usually done in mainstream organizations?
See, many times, I think from a mainstream perspective, there is a tendency, you have a fixed program, you have a fixed design that has worked with majority of the community, so there's an assumption made that one size fits all. And maybe service providers, however good their intentions are, they might not have enough time to actually unpack it with the community and address issues that might arise as we go along. So I think with the project in consultation with the ANROWS team, we consciously made an effort to invest in that trust-building relationship and not ignore issues and challenges that kept coming up, because you could brush it away and say, we're focusing on domestic violence prevention, we're focusing on designing of interventions, and ignore the rest. We couldn't separate the two. So I think time is a factor, and understanding that tailoring and customizing and allowing communities to own the intervention is important if it has to be successful and it has to work.
Thanks, Dipti. And now we do have a question from the audience on this area. This question is, how are you getting the message across about domestic violence, especially in this pandemic period where COVID-19 has forced people to stay at home? Now, Dipti, I know that your project was quite innovative in this area. Did you want to add any comments about this question?
Yeah, just going back to one piece of a project, like other projects too, we did have bilingual facilitators or bilingual community workers who were part of the project, who were trained in building the bridge between us and the community. They were men and women identified by the communities themselves. Now it's come in good for us, especially during the COVID time, where we've actually tapped into these local networks that these bilingual community educators or facilitators have. So it's not, it might not be the fancy Zoom, which is the in thing today, but they use simple things like WhatsApp, phone calls to just stay connected to women in the community whom they've established relationships with. So a lot of information is disseminated. Sometimes it's, last week I had a bilingual educator who actually spoke to me and said that women just want to speak on the phone. They just want to talk. They just want to share. And a lot of our refugee communities, like our South Sudanese communities, this isolation is creating a lot of other issues, such as memories of time they've been in camps, or memories of war where they've been stuck in a place. And also this created opportunities for these bilingual facilitators to connect them subtly and safely to caseworkers, to services that can still provide support. At times, we've noticed it's just a listening ear, and because of these established relationships, it just becomes a natural progression of support and connecting with services that continues to happen. What we've also done is we've used some of our local grassroots level contacts that we've made through the project to create resources that are in language and will be useful to the community. So some of them do access mainstream, fantastic resources that teams like SBS Radio have created, but we've also created our own resources designed by the community in consultation with the community that is disseminated faster, and there's greater acceptance. It's still a challenge, Maria, because many of them are still not able to come out of their homes, but we'll wait and see how things go. But we want the community to know that we are there. We're just a call away, a text away, a door away, if need be, to support them.
Thanks, Dipti, and those comments on the continuing and constant support that you do offer, and the line to other services as well, is so important. If we can now go to Catherine as well.
Hi, Maria. Thanks. And as Dipti has said, it's sometimes difficult with technology, but we know from speaking to our partners in prevention and also in some of our own work that people are checking in directly with community members using WhatsApp, text, even email and Zoom. And also, we're just emphasizing the message on our social media outreach and also in radio shows that our bilingual health educators have been delivering. And you can find information about those radio shows on our website. That although we acknowledge additional pressures on families and households at this time are creating extra stress, and that it's very real during COVID-19 crisis, that violence is never okay and there's no excuse for it. And we're ensuring that people know that mental health and family violence response services are still available, even if it's by phone, and that some are still open to go in person, and so keeping people up to date about what is available where.
Thank you, Catherine, and those are some really important channels to keep those that information flowing and people aware of services and help that's out there. To add to what the presenters have pointed out, we know that projects have always used social media platforms like WeChat and WhatsApp, and they've been doing things like creating digital stories. So the fact that they've used these multiple channels has given them an advantage at this time to be able to use that a lot more when we're in this pandemic period. And we also know that there are projects in the initiative, like the project at Women's Legal Service in South Australia that created a smartphone app with in-language information about services. So that work is particularly relevant at this time as well. So now we're going to move on to our second segment on engaging CALD men as allies in prevention. Many projects are aiming to do gender transformative work with men in this area, and we'll be looking at two main insights around this. The first is to promote positive family relationships and gender equality in non-judgmental spaces for CALD men. And the second is, from the outset of grant funding, invest in capacity building on gender transformative and culturally safe prevention work with men in CALD communities. Well, we're now looking at an example video from Save the Children Western Australia about how they engage men and boys in prevention focus groups and workshops. Don't forget to submit your questions while the video plays.
Okay, so Maria has asked us to present on our project for the webinar. So my name's Danielle.
And my name is Margaret.
And we're from the Strength to Strength CALD PAR project through Save the Children, which was based in the city of Gosnells.
So the strength worked with at 3 levels of the community. At Tier 1, we worked with 19 men from African backgrounds.
In Tier 2, we worked with young people aged between 11 and 16 from Afghan, Burundi and Arabic-speaking backgrounds.
Yeah, and at Tier 3, we worked with young people. So we delivered school workshops, primary prevention workshops in 2 schools, and the 2 schools had a high population of young people from CALD backgrounds. So at Tier 1, we engaged 19 men. So the 19 men were recruited through our contracted facilitator. And what worked well, we had a high level of engagement in our focus group discussions. We engaged them in focus group discussions over 12 weeks. And one of the things that worked really well was the fact that the facilitator was from the same cultural and religious backgrounds as the men.
So we started conversations around primary prevention. We did encounter resistance around women's equality and violence against women.
Yeah, so what we would, moving forward, there is need to keep on focusing on changing attitudes towards gender inequalities amongst men when working with men. Yeah.
So Tier 2 was a weekly after-school program, and again we experienced high levels of engagement from the young people.
Yeah, at least within the first term of implementing the program, we had a participation of at least 90%, and throughout the program, over 80% of the participants did participate in the program. And we also made some impacts. Our evaluation data indicates that there was some level of changes in beliefs and perceptions. For example, by the end of the program, most of the boys had rejected the statements that it's okay to share photos and texts and videos of women or girls online to scare them. And we also worked with the mums.
Yeah, so the mums reported noticing increased levels of independence and confidence at home with their sons, and also offering to help with household chores.
Yeah, and beyond that, beyond just achieving the outcomes of the project, the boys felt that it was a safe space. We provided a safe space for them to engage in conversations around relationship ethics, to form friendships, and to connect with the Australian life through the facilitators.
Yeah, so I will leave you with a few words from one of the young people.
Before joining Strength to Strength program, I didn't know anything about insecurity, really. I thought it's like men are rough, they are strong, they can do anything, they can run the family whatever way they want. That's all I knew before joining Strength to Strength program. The stereotype is like men never cry, but they do. Like they say that men are not weak, they are strong. But according to me, yes, they are. They are not superhumans, yeah? They are like a normal person who can cry, who can do whatever they want. But this stereotype is like they should not do it. It was not a program, it was like more like a family. We had good sisters who would always advise us and show us the right way, like Daniel, Lisa and Laura. We had nice brothers who would show us how to deal with your stress, how to treat others nicely, how to be respectful. Who were Kwaka, Joseph, and all the multicultural boys who were in our program. I think it was a golden chance for me to get to spend my time with them. I learned from them. I learned skills. I learned how to respect. I learned many things.
Thank the Children WA and their project participant for that wonderful video, highlighting the importance of targeting different age groups and the importance of bicultural facilitation in ensuring a supportive space for engaging CALD men in prevention. Now, Seble, I know that your project had quite a lot of engagement with bicultural facilitation and used that to ensure a supportive space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Thanks, Maria. Yes, our project is Mind Managing Change Program. It's a pilot project for men support group. It's tailored to support men based on their interest and hobby to create a safe space to connect. And for this, I think the bicultural workers are vitally useful in this, and especially themselves, because we use male facilitator on that, we make sure they are actually themselves, they have a right attitude and also behavioral change in terms of gender. So they were being very, very instrumental from the recruitment of participants and also through the program being there as agents to facilitate that conversation. On that also we had not bicultural workers also assisted by the facilitator from the legal space, how men was felt during our community conversation. We ran a men group to discuss about what their understanding in family conflict and also family violence, and that we identified there is a gap how they understand domestic family violence. So we, especially from the legal point of view, and they felt more betrayed in the society where they come. They will have good for life, but they felt differently. And because of that, bicultural worker was facilitating addressing some of the issues through the help of their rights. So Refugee Legal Service was being facilitating the legal side of it, what's their right also, but also what's their responsibility in this country, in their new home. Through that, in the beginning there was a resistance and also more just one-sided and externalize the problem. But through along the discussion, it's a 10-week, but actively the conversation was 8 weeks. But we also, after that, we develop other materials in terms of they're changing through time, through that conversation from the space which we provide. The bicultural worker was there as a facilitator from making cooking and also going through, some if they're independent on their interests, they go to the woodwork and also playing pool and just more feeling that their space. So the biculture was playing a big role on that and make them, the participants, feel welcome and safe.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I know you touched there on that there was some resistance in your project to gender equality messages, and that was something that SCCWA as well referred to in their video. What else did you do to address that resistance and address, the feelings of a lost identity that they faced? And I know that you also worked with women in your community conversations as well, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, through because the resistance along the beginning of the project was mapped what is the strength in a community, what's the threat or the gaps between the service providers and also the community, but also the gap of knowledge, how domestic family violence was being understood in the community. So through that, we had a main group only who have a discussion on that, but also women, both together, husband and wife came together. So through that, we were being, there's a long resistance because they felt very betrayal by the partner or by the service. This is not the place for them and they don't have rights. So they don't expect much change. All this was being kind of in the the information they have is being framed, which is it's a women's country, it's not my country. It's being threat their identity. But what we did is through conversation saying, okay, we all choose to be here to have a good life and to continue to have our family. How can we actually, address that? Because we know in one way or another way our behavior as individual we have to take. So those challenge was we reflect back to the participants to just see through. They have also this country, the law is for men and women, and each individual have to look at through their own behavior and what's their contribution to make it their life better and to make it their family's life safe. So through that, there was a trust developed through time, especially in the managing change program, because some of our activities was being, tailored to just cook their own meal after the activity, and that male bicultural worker also other participants who have a better view in things, they shaping each other. So that once they know that the place is for them, to just make it things better and also look at themselves and then what's their role in that. It is developed in through time. The trust is being built on that, but there is a huge resistance. But also giving enough time, especially in the community conversation space, we give enough time for a community. We weren't rushed too much when we, rather than ask just on our time, that we choose their time. So we go to the church, we go to a mosque and their birthday place, wherever there is a comfort for a community to relax and speak and take action. So that helped us to overcome.
Thank you, Seble, for answering that question on resistance. I was also wondering, Dipti, if you wanted to comment on this and how your project responded to resistance when engaging CALD men in prevention.
Thanks, Maria. One thing that we learned during our project, and even as we progress, is we need to be real when we work with communities, and resistance is a part of this reality. And we did have instances of resistance, especially coming from the men in the community. And it was a humbling experience, especially when you think that things are going smooth, you build a trust, and you're just going to have smooth sailing, and the resistance comes and just like hits you, and you almost get back to square one. And one thing that I personally learned was I can't try and fix it myself, the resistance that we face, and it had to be jointly addressed collaboratively with the community. And one specific instance when we did have resistance, and I had to actually step back and allow it to kind of unfold, and then go back to the community and jointly decide how to address it. And what we decided to do was ignore it at that particular stage, because that was not the right space to kind of address it or fight it or defend it. And then we went back to the community and discussed with them and reopened the discussion. It was just magical to see that the community supports you, and since you do have champions who agree with you, who are on your side, and we addressed the situation and things went fine. So the particular individual involved had to be spoken to, and we decided to disagree, but majority of the stakeholders in the community was okay for us to progress. So we essentially agreed to disagree, but opened opportunities to dialogue and to debate and to address the issues that were raised.
We're now going to turn to our third segment for the webinar, to capacity building in culturally safe practice, and in particular the need for more integration and partnerships between settlement, multicultural and family violence services. So our key insights for action in this area are introduce cultural safety training and service partnerships to build capacity across settlement services, mainstream family violence services and law enforcement agencies, as well as support bicultural workers through individual safety plans, culturally safe management practices and professional opportunities. We have a video example from the Safer Pathways project at Ballarat Community Health about these insights. It also includes comments from 2 members of the project's reference group who supported its implementation. If you have a question for the panel on capacity building, please submit it now. We'll also have some time for taking general questions after the video.
Hello, this is Leslie McCartney from Ballarat Community Health. I'm leading the Safer Pathways for Refugee and Immigrant Women in Ballarat and Western Victoria project, which is part of the CALD Power initiative. Our project has worked on capacity building in the areas of cultural safety and cultural humility with a range of agencies and services, including training sessions for health service staff, non-governmental community services and staff from law enforcement agencies. We completed a detailed training needs and gap analysis to inform the rollout of professional development workshops. And through this analysis, we identified gaps among service providers in navigating the service system, the family violence service system, in family violence referral networks and interagency arrangements for refugee and immigrant women at risk or experiencing family violence, as well as in trauma-informed care for this cohort. We also consulted with women from a range of diverse communities in Ballarat and discovered that there was a universal understanding that family violence meant physical violence, but there was virtually no understanding of other forms of family violence. So there was also a lack of awareness among women and girls that help was available for family violence. We knew we had a lot of work to do to improve awareness of the types of family violence and how and where to seek help with this community. So attending service network meetings and persisting in bringing up the importance of cultural safety and cultural humility training was important for getting organisational buy-in for the training to take place. Ballarat Community Health partnered with the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health in Melbourne, another CALD project organisation, to provide culturally safe facilitation of some of our community education events to increase awareness of family violence and services. MCWH also contributed to workplace cultural competency workshops. We also developed a localised service provider directory for the local health district and a family violence referral flowchart, which we then shared with health service providers and other mainstream services, as well as the local primary health network, Western Victoria Primary Health Network, in both Central Highlands and Wimmera districts. Some service providers were very receptive to our work and others took a bit longer to take on our key messages. However, the work of capacity building is important for planting the seed of future work to address culturally safe practices among stakeholders in the family violence sector.
I'm Marianne Hendren, the CEO at Women's Health Grampians. The Ballarat and Western Victoria Safer Pathways project has contributed significantly to building capacity amongst agencies in this region around intersectionality and cultural safety. In particular, it has engaged really well with agencies and key services in the western part of this region, the more rural and remote areas, where migrant and refugee women are particularly isolated and vulnerable. So this has been very much welcomed.
It's been fantastic working with the Safer Pathways project in the Central Highlands region. I chaired the reference group for this project, and a whole group of different agencies came together who had never really come together before in this way to work out the best way as a region to be able to respond to family violence for refugee and immigrant women. So part of the project was that the whole region built capacity to be able to respond to refugee and immigrant women. It wasn't just agency focused. I'm also the Risk Family Violence Support Agency Executive Officer. And because of that, I was also able to influence the staff at my organisation to be able to respond in a way and to be able to have better access to refugee and immigrant women in relation to family violence. And this included developing some policies and procedures around this, working out how to use interpreter services in a much better and appropriate way. We also had students in this 2019 who were from refugee and immigrant backgrounds. So that really built our capacity and confidence in this area.
Thanks to Ballarat Community Health and their advisory group members, highlighting the importance of mobilising through networks and training sessions to build capacity in culturally safe practice across regions. Catherine, your project in particular worked with Leslie at Ballarat Community Health, among other partners. Can you tell us a little bit about how your project delivery model works with networks of services in different regional locations?
Yes, so as we said, we are based in Melbourne, so we aim to build the expertise build on the expertise of community health and multicultural organizations in regional areas. And our work is more sustainable when we add value to the work that's already being done there and not trying to duplicate anything that's being done in the area. So as Leslie said in the video, in Ballarat, we partnered with Ballarat Community Health to facilitate community education events as part of our both of our Safer Pathways projects. And in our work in Ballarat, as well as in Bendigo, Swan Hill, and Mildura, we conducted training needs analysis for service providers and tailored training to build the capacity of services to work equitably with migrant communities. And talking about building trust, it was much more effective to travel to the regional areas for face-to-face meetings rather than just speaking on the phone or sending emails before delivering education sessions or training. And I think it's also important to note that there are prevention contributors, or the kind of, I think what's said in the CALD PAR report is accidental helpers. And so we also looked at in areas where there weren't necessarily special services or the multicultural services were overbooked or, whatever made it difficult to coordinate in certain areas, we would also look at building the capacity of local councils and mainstream services, and even university and TAFE staff working with international students, for example.
Fantastic. Thanks for bringing that issue of accidental workers to the fore as well. And in the training and capacity building your project carried out, what was the difference between focusing on cultural safety rather than the other frameworks like cultural competence that are out there?
Yeah, so that's at the core of all of the work we do at Multicultural Centre for Women's Health. And Leslie touched on that as well in her video. But basically, cultural safety or humility is about focusing on the systems and structures of power that impact people's lives. So that could include, in case of migrant women and men, the migration system, the availability of information in language, access to transportation and other services. And we really like to emphasize that you can't know a person by assuming or making cultural stereotypes or presumptions that reduce people to a culture based on whether it's their language or nationality or faith, and that we should always be considering what are the different forces at play that influence people's lives, and especially in a response sense, fully listening to a person and understanding what it is that makes people feel afraid or feel safe, and what, allow them to make informed choices for themselves.
Thanks, Catherine. And I know that MCWH has been quite innovative with how it's put in place workplace structures to support its bicultural workers. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yep, so I won't go too much into the challenges that bilingual and bicultural workers face when working in prevention, but I know that the CALD PAR report does do that. But it's really important that organizations support bilingual workers as integral employees of an organization. So they're not add-ons to an organization. They're not called on just as needed responsively, but really that bicultural and bilingual workers contribute a significant amount to an organization as a whole, and also need very specific support in their roles because of the unique circumstances. So, for example, some ways that we can support bilingual workers and bicultural workers is to agree on really clear boundaries around what their role entails and what it doesn't entail. So, for example, if they're not working in response or counseling or even in interpreting, then that's not what should be expected of them by the organization or by the community that they're working with. And also being able to keep clear boundaries around their working and non-working hours if they are part of a community that they're working with. And also co-creating risk management strategies. So that could involve having flexible employment policies and making sure that there's debriefing time and planning meetings before and after contracted work or education sessions, for example, and ensuring that workers are equitably paid for their time, including that preparation and debrief time, and also celebrating the work that they do and showcasing their work on social media and supporting their career advancement and recognition, because a lot of bicultural and bilingual workers might be working for multiple organizations at once due to the casual nature of that kind of role currently. And finally, I just want to say that it's really important that people don't, like I said before about cultural humility, that people don't conflate a person speaking a certain language, meaning that they have similar views to or belief systems as the people they're working with in a community, and that perspectives on gender equality and people's experiences are very diverse within and across cultures.
Thank you, Catherine. We do have some time now for some general questions from the audience. The first is about the trust building process with communities. The audience member wants to know, what are the main elements that are necessary for this trust building process to take place?
So I'm just going to, I've actually got my notes in front of me, and I've come up with some kind of formula that we learned during our process around trust building. If you remember, the project says rich culture should have rich relationships. And for our project with the communities, we started from a place of strength, and the title was coined in consultation with both the communities involved, and they suggested it. And one of the wins or the steps for trust building is coming from a position of recognizing the strength, or literally doing an inventory of the positives that the community already had, because then they value the respect you have. So a place of strength, so rich cultures, when we recognize their strength, we understand they have a richness that they already bring into the equation. And once you recognize it, it's easier. You just feel equipped. You feel confident, both for communities and the people working with them. And it was just beautiful to recognize and honor the courage it takes for each of these people to start off in a new country. And, Maria mentioned before settlement issues and challenges. And despite it, they want to engage with us on this project. And the second one was relationship and respect. Investing in relationships, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it's taken us a couple of months, more than a year. You can't rush into it, and making it people-centered is very important. And people-centeredness takes time, takes effort, takes doing boring meetings, takes attending long cultural events that you might not appreciate initially, but it just grows on you, and you become part of their fabric, and you build relationships that are for life. And it's important that these relationships are built, and you constantly over-communicate the respect. And you do initially, I don't want to say exaggerate the rapport, but maybe to an extent you do that because you want them to know that you care and you're investing in it as an equal partner. So I said rich cultures, relationship and respect. The third one was being real. Being real with what you can achieve because you're not doing it on your own, and being real enough to reassess your goals. And I still remember in a lot of conversations with Maria and Liz from ANROWS, we had to go back to the drawing board because the community was not ready or the community had different ideas. So constantly going back and having realistic goals and reporting it back to your community because they want to know what's happening. You have a meeting, you've decided with your internal teams, but they need to understand how we're progressing. And the other one was resistance. We already spoke about. It's real projects. You're dealing with people. We are not perfect, and there will be resistance. You can't ignore it, but you figure out a way to address it. And the last one was reflecting constantly. And for me, that was a learning because, you're very action-oriented. You have milestones to achieve, but reflecting. And I should thank Liz and Maria for constantly pushing us to make notes, to reflect, and to understand, to think out loud, because once you reflect and you actually physically put those notes down, you understand what worked, what didn't, and you need to be humble enough to go back to the community and say, I can do this, I can't do this, I'm sorry about this. So these were a few of the things that helped us in our project in building trust. And it's not linear. It's, you keep going back to appreciating the richness, you keep going back to building rapport, you keep hitting and facing resistance, you keep changing the way you're reporting, you come up with innovative ways of reassessing goals, and more than anything, you're ready to fail, and you're ready to fail together. When the wins and the losses are shared with the community, it's a different kind of a success story, and we're still learning, and we have come out richer than the communities themselves, because how much they open up to you and how much they share and how much you learn. No textbook, no university or webinar is going to give you that. Thanks, Maria.
So, Dipti, thank you for sharing those elements of the trust building process. Now, how did that trust building process, just for the audience on that question, how did that trust building process actually help you pursue more creative projects with the community?
It is, when I initially started, I spoke that our aim was to create culturally appropriate interventions in partnership with the communities, and we had to take in inputs. When you're building trust, it's not just one way. You need input from your equal partner, which is the community. And with the Punjabi community, they wanted to explore art as a medium to get DV prevention messages across. So we've actually collaborated with the community and come up with two thought-provoking plays in Punjabi and Hindi and English, a mix of Hindi and English, reflecting and actually capturing the issues that were raised by the communities themselves through focus groups. So they'll most probably be staged end of this year. They were planned actually in June, but the COVID crisis has dampened all those plans. But the actors, the creative director, the staff doing the recording are all from the community that partnered with us. So they're owning the story, and it has evolved beautifully. So you start with a blank sheet. There was a writer's workshop from which involved community members, and they went through the focus group findings, and they were able to chalk out a script. So it's very exciting, and it's a creatively disturbing exercise too. And when we discussed the script and we went through it, there were many people around the table crying, and it resonated with them, with people in their circles, and we were hoping that it would be powerful, not just for the survivors who've had their stories told, but for communities, for bystanders to take action. And it's art. It's nothing new as such. It has been used as therapy, and we hope it's healing and it'll call for action. And seeing it on stage, looking it through when an actor brings it to life, will be an interesting experience. Another thing what we've done is we've used the equality wheel, and in our interactions we did a couple of education sessions with the communities. We noticed that some of the behaviors the community felt was not culturally responsive. So we've actually gone back to the community and asked them to share with us culturally responsive behaviors to form part of the equality wheel. And the response has been very good, both men and women. And I want to emphasize men again, Maria, because that was one of the aspects of the project we invested in, is bringing men on board. We didn't want to isolate them. We wanted them to be part of it. And they've done a fantastic job actually contributing to what works. So hopefully when that takes shape, this is something that the community can use. What is it to be respectful? And when you break it down into behaviors in their own, with their own cultural hues in their own context, it makes it easier to action it, whether it's a man, a woman, a young person. So these were two creative things that we've used. We've also going to have some songwriters put in songs as part of our play, and we're exploring options to do it as a street play in areas where we have large presence of this community. So that's let's see how it goes, and we're happy with the progress.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dipti, for sharing that. Now, Seble, did you have anything to add on this question of trust building with communities?
Yes, I really like to add something, actually. I think one of the it's important question to be answered, especially working this domestic family violence, as we all know, it's a multiple layer there. So communities are vital in this. With our project, as I said earlier, we were being the project worker itself is part of the community leaders network, which has been more than 10 years in Brisbane area in Queensland, ongoing, coming up with what matter their own community, and they come. It's a loose network run by, administered by Multicultural Australia. So they were being with us all along with this project, and they take it as their own. And because also the settlement relationship, which we, the workers and also the partner organization they have, there is trust was being developed. But also we were being aware during our community conversation when we ran that, it's more than 6 months actually been run that conversation. We were being first planned for 3 months, but because the community wasn't ready to do those things, and we were taking time to, by consulting the leaders or key community members, make sure also we didn't use those gatekeepers, which community sometimes they're very suspicious. We were being very aware with that, so we acknowledge the loose network the community already has. So we have that formal discussion with using the formal leaders. Sometimes when depend on the community, there is a loose group. So we were being open with that, and they see us as a partner to solve the issue which matter for them, or both, which stop them their good life and their families. So we also frame, we didn't use at all in most of the time in the beginning, we say community conversation to manage our good life in Australia, in here. So that framing itself is helping, and that relationship they have, individual participant leaders have a good relationship with those who run the community conversation. That shows them actually we take those whatever being said for better of the community. So again, I think the question was there how you can build. It's not like for a short-term project, but it is being built for a long time. And I think all the community organization, all service providers, they should build that in process. So communities observe and they understand. Sometimes they don't loudly say it, but they look who's doing for true change. So that kind of relation is actually helping.
Thank you, Seble. And now we have another question from the audience on service providers' perceptions that culture can sometimes be used as a smokescreen for violence against women, and there can be perceptions that we've always done it this way. How do you manage this? Catherine, I'm going to go to you if you have a perspective on this question.
Hi, Maria. So we see this happening quite a bit in the work that we do, and it can come up as a form of backlash in training, for example. And we really highlight the fact that there is no, culture is not fixed, it's constantly changing. There are cultures all around the world and within Australia and within the mainstream Anglo-Australian culture that are patriarchal and perpetuate gender inequality, and that no one culture is more or less violent, and that there's no excuse for violence, and it's not just about that's the way things are, because there is no static, traditional culture to point to. We're all living in the modern world, and people around the world have progressed themselves and progressed others around them to combat gender inequality. When people use that, we can challenge that by saying that no, the causes of violence are gender inequality, and that is across all cultures.
I just want to add also with that, if we have time, Maria.
Yes, we do. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that is really across we see, because we had a target group with men. We work closely with men, and yes, it comes a lot that it not sometimes also even from the women comes out. But one thing we just use is the example of where we are at now. For example, things are not static because we are reflecting back. The change is natural, and adaptation is the way to continue our life in a peaceful way. So we actually get, they came from refugee or migrant background. They are here, they adapt new life. Back home, they cook something differently, but they cook it differently in here, how they adjust that. So with simple example in everyday life, change is constant, and you have to be yourself being adapted with that, or you will have another consequence, which is, if you choose to use violence to solve your conflict, that is actually puts you in jail at the end of the day. It's illegal, and it's not acceptable. So we actually use example which is now is where they live now and what they were been living in the past. For just a good example, one of our main shared participant was it was really hard for him in the first few weeks to join the kitchen to prepare meals. He was saying, in my culture, men can't even pass the kitchen door. So how can I do this? It was too much for him to accept by age, his big mature age. And we were saying we are here now because back home maybe women don't have jobs and things are not the same. But in here, the kitchen, everything is different. And the other male was being saying, I wasn't cook by home, but I did it now. It's really good to be this. And so challenging and create a space where you can actually change yourself and reform yourself. And that at the end of the program, actually, that gentleman are joining the kitchen, and he enjoyed the being in that space, learning new skills. So I think sometimes we need to use a simple example what they actually how they can understand is important, because sometimes too much wording around will not help.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for acknowledging the way the culture changes and the adaptations that are happening. We do have time for two more questions. I might go to the question about how to manage both prevention and capacity building activities on a small budget. If I can go to Catherine here to comment on that.
Yes, sorry. Did you say how to manage prevention projects on a small budget?
Yes, prevention activities as well as capacity building activities on a small budget.
Yes. So there's a few things that we do. So one of the things we've done in making the link is making sure that the advisory group members for the project represent as many regional areas as possible across all of the areas we're working in. And that helps us to increase our outreach, but also to understand what's happening locally and to adapt and change the direction of our project as we need to. And we do that on a number of our prevention projects. We also look at different opportunities to maximize networking and collaboration across projects. So, for example, we have a number of projects with overlapping areas of work where we're delivering education sessions to women on gender equality and related topics. So we have the Gambling Awareness Project and the Rural and Reproductive Health Project connected to making the link. So we were able to make contact about multiple projects at the same time. So that's a really strategic way to approach working with multiple stakeholders. And at the same time, I think I mentioned before, but that we planned our travel to different regions strategically, so making sure that we aligned with activities that were already happening in the area, whether that's parenting groups or English classes, so that we can add on to where people are already meeting and not have to, overexhaust people, asking people to come together again, and then also adding to professional development calendars and asking organizations to meet more times than they're able to throughout the year. And also what's great about having project partners is that we were able to coordinate venue hire and catering with local caterers, for example, through our project partners. And so, for example, in Bendigo with Loddon Compass Multicultural Services, we use the Friday Food Safari to provide catering for a community education group. So that's, I think those are some ideas about how to work within a limited budget, which we all have to do.
Thank you, Catherine. And we now have a related question about continuity and ensuring that the activities of the project or the impact of the project continue after the actual funding finishes. And I'll go to Dipti now for her perspective on this question of continuity.
Thanks, Maria. Right from the beginning, the participatory action research approach held good for us because the community was an equal partner, and we invested heavily in developing communities' conceptual understanding and recognition of domestic violence. So there were a lot of things that we did to empower the community. In fact, we got them trained in research methodology. We got them trained in understanding domestic violence using services of recognized domestic violence awareness organizations. And once you get a group of people to actually think and own the concept and literally localize it, it just helped it make it much more sustainable. They are more self-reliant, like the creative ideas that came up after that. They want to take it forward. In fact, with the South Sudanese community, they went on to start an adolescent girls group that meets every week, and this was their own initiative. It was not part of our plans. It was not part of what we had in our goals. It was not part of our milestones. It was their own initiative. Or with the Punjabi community that used a survey that was designed as part of the project in another local health district, in another local government area. So they started owning it, and they took the leadership to carry it on. And there's different opportunities that arise when they take the risk and when they give it a shot. So there were skill-building opportunities that were used initially in the project that has equipped them to continue what was initiated and to build on it and do it much, much better than what we could have ideated. So going back again to the piece on trust, when we invest for a community to improve, they value it, and they go on to do bigger and better things than we could have imagined when we started. So it was important to do the initial bonding and foundation laying right, so that the project is much more sustainable. And another good thing I noticed is because of the investment in sustainability, we're able to tap into the richness and the resourcefulness of these communities we have worked with for other projects we're working on within our local health district, Maria.
Thank you, Dipti. And I know, Seble, this is an area that you've been reflecting on quite a lot as well. Did you have any comments about continuity?
Yeah, I think with the small money, it's hard to deliver what we have been delivering. But because of the support we got from the other agencies, which is, for example, RILES, Refugee Legal Service, and also Multicultural Australia, and also other bunch of service providers, we were been working together from getting a free space to deliver, but also the key partner was community leaders. They were being voluntary. They were being giving us a lot of their time to engage, and that's the key for us. Partnership and collaboration and filling the gap is really helping us in terms of delivering beyond our project funded for. So, as I said, we were being only funded to address the 6 community from African community groups, but we were being managing more than 27 community groups from 12 ethnic background, and more than 167 people were engaged in our research in the community conversation, and more than 200 people was being engaged in total in this program. So that happened because we have that good relationship with other service providers. And for example, UK was helping us in terms of finding literatures in behind, and also RILES is helping on terms of the legal framing our message for micro video for multicultural community managing change program. So all this happened because that collaboration supports each other, and still ongoing. We are continue doing it, because that's one of the things we learn from the community. They don't like to see one thing only to being suddenly there's a project and then gone by the time community are engaged. So we are now, even for continuity after the project, the funding period, we partner with SAFE to pilot good life learning from early on, because that's the community was asking early education about gender and about also law in Australia is important. So we were managing to deliver a 10 weeks program with partnering with RILES and TAFE. So this helping to continue the work we've done, because it's not 1 or 2 years, 3 years work. It needs to be continued. So that partnership is really helpful for communities or on a long-term change in this space.
Thanks, Seble, and some really good points there about partnership as well. As we come to the end of our question time, we had more than one question come in from the audience about how to evaluate interventions in this space and how to measure success factors in CALD communities. So I'll now go to Seble for an answer on this question.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, I think the action research method is really useful. I was keep saying that to you, for your organization, having that in with us and using of methodology through our project is really key in terms of to be flexible. Again, as we said earlier, community. It takes time when it's for these multi-layer issues. So we use evaluation as first we plan with the community leaders, bicultural workers to deliver some projects. And then if it's not working, we actually continuously, we have the backup and plan that with the participants, how they want that program to continue. So using those methodology in our process, I think actually helping us to engage a lot of community leaders and they've been more confident actually to engage because it is not only one way, it's a two-way approach. So that helped in terms of for us to be flexible enough and also in the funding space. The funding provider, because we have ANROWS overseeing this and giving that freedom of being changing constantly to fit the communities. That actually whatever we achieve is because of those methodology we use through our work.
Thanks, Seble. And I'll also go to Catherine now. Any last reflections on the evaluation in this initiative?
Hi, yes. There's not too much to add to what everyone said, but I would say also, of course, in addition to evaluation forms for our funders in terms of the immediate and short-term effectiveness of a program, important, or what I like to do is take a lot of notes, and especially in training and education sessions, because then you're able to identify what are some of the common themes that come up, and similar to what was mentioned before about that smoke screen of using culture as an excuse not to talk about gender equality or not to touch the subject of family violence, just being able to identify those common comments and then address ways to unpack those and to address them in future conversations. And then also, it's also kind of following up with people, so not just feedback forms, but after training, but also following up with participants in programs that you're working in. So, for example, we hear from women that do the Women's Leadership Program called PACE through MCWH, what they've done since the program, so whether that's public speaking or new job opportunities or even creating their own business and linking up with local councils and local organizations to progress their own work. That's a really good indicator for us that the work we've been doing is successful.
Thanks, Catherine. And I will check back in with Dipti now to see if she wanted to add a few comments on this topic.
Can you hear me, Maria?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. What we really like about the participatory action research, like a lot of my colleagues have said, is the partnership with the community and keeping community central. And I'd like to take from Catherine's notes about reflection. And not only reflecting individually for us as project workers, but reflection in collaboration with the community. And this reflection helped us a lot to actually go back to the drawing board, like I mentioned before. And it was a shared ownership with both the project team and the communities. So the outcomes were celebrated jointly, and the failures and the challenges were fixed jointly. So it was, as Seble also mentioned, it was a constant cycle of learning and applying and valuing the richness and strengths that already exist within a community to address this issue of domestic violence and jointly fighting against it and empowering communities to face it and make it more sustainable, their efforts more sustainable.
Thank you, Dipti, and thank you to all of our presenters, as well as the teams who sent in videos. A really big thank you has to go to all of the CALD projects for their fantastic work in this initiative. Thank you to all of those of you who joined us today for our webinar. You can download the full Research Insights report and see the CALD project's digital and project stories on the ANROWS website. If you are interested in viewing any more of our webinars, please also visit the ANROWS website. Thanks again, everyone.